Hi, I'm Sharyn, Education and Youth Librarian with Wyndham City Libraries. Welcome back to Virtual Teen Read Along for Chapter 22 of Tomorrow When the War Began by John Marsden. Ali and Fiona talking about boys suggest again there is no escaping love and emotions, even during the stress of war. They've placed a tanker under the bridge and blown it up. Let's read Chapter 22.
When we met Homer and Lee up in the gully behind the Fleet's house, there was a babble of noise for about 10 minutes, while everyone trying to talk at once. Relief, excitement, explanations, apologies. "Everyone shut up!" Lee finally yelled, using Homer's tactic, and in the sudden silence said, "There, that's better. Now, Fee, you go first." We told our stories, then the boys told theirs. Feeling safer on their side of the river, they'd stayed to watch the explosion, the earthquake that we'd only heard and felt. "Oh, Ali," Homer said, "it was the greatest thing I've ever seen." Began to fear that we'd turn him into a pyromaniac too. "Yeah," said Lee, "it was a real blast." "Tell us everything," I said. "Take your time. We've got all day." The morning had begun and we were breakfasting on cans from the Fleet's pantry. I had baked beans and tuna. I was feeling pretty good. I'd had a pre-dawn swim in the dam and was glad to have washed the last of the petrol from my skin. I was in the mood to be treated gently. I was looking forward to snuggling into Lee for most of the day. But in the meantime, I was happy to be lie back and close my eyes and hear a bedtime story. "Well," said Homer, "it went so well at first. We got to the stud with no hassles, although pushing those bikes the last few k's was hard work." Homer had done it twice, taking his bike to the hiding place, then going back for Lee's. "As you know," he went on, "our plan was for me to do the mustering and to get them onto the road nice and quietly. Then Lee was going to hide on the road and jump out at them with the flash, while I used the prod to stampede them. We'd only been able to find one prod and ruled out the aerosol can as too dangerous. But we'd found a battery-operated flash attachment for a camera, and Homer was confident that the quick, blinding flashes of light would do the trick. So there we were," Homer continued, "nicely set up, just lying back in the paddock, watching the stars and dreaming of huge, fresh T-bone steaks. We had a few chats too, you know, and we were happy to wait for a convoy to roll through. Then we hit our two big problems. One, there was no convoy came. That wouldn't have been so bad, maybe. We could have at least called you and told you we were going ahead anyway, though there was still the big danger that we'd suddenly find a convoy up our backsides. But the other problem was that the bloody walkie-talkie packed it in. We couldn't believe it. We tried everything. In the end, Lee just took it to bits, but it was as dead as the dinosaurs. Well, we were pretty desperate. We knew you'd be sitting there in a lot of danger, waiting for a signal that wasn't going to come. We got close to panic at that point, I guess. We had two choices, to go ahead with the cattle and hope you'd be able to react in time, or to call it off. But we couldn't call it off without telling you that we have left you in an impossible situation. That was our weakness in our planning. We relied too much on the walkie-talkies. That's one thing I've learned. Don't put too much trust in machines. So we only had one choice, really. It was getting so late we couldn't wait any longer for a convoy. Lee went out into the road to do his flashing, and I got the cattle moving. "How?" Fee asked. "Hey? How? How do you get a big mob of cattle to do what you want in the middle of the night?" I remembered she'd wanted an answer to his question before. She was serious about becoming a rural. "Well," said Homer, looking a bit silly, "you hiss." "You what?" "You hiss. Old Cutterman's trick. Old Miss Bamford taught me. They don't like hissing, so you walk around behind them and making like a snake." I half expected to see Fee take out a notebook and earnestly write it down. Having given away one of his professional secrets, Homer went on. "Our big ambition was to hold them in the road until the sentries were at the right end of the bridge, but it was hopeless. The cattle were too restless, and we were scared that a convoy or a patrol would turn up. So we got the prod and the flash, and away we went. It was fun," Lee said reflectively, "except for the first few seconds when I thought that they were going to charge me." "But the guards were right at the end of the bridge," I said. "They were in the perfect spot." "Were they? Well, that's the best bit of luck we had in the whole business then. That was totally unplanned. We just worked the cattle up to a frenzy till they were outrunning us. Then we raced back and got the bikes. Next thing we saw was when we stopped the bikes along the riverbank to have a look. And I'll tell you what, I wish we'd brought the camera as well as a flash. It was unbelievable. The last cattle were rumbling off the bridge and the soldiers were still hanging off the sides of it, but they were firing at you, Ali, like it was duck season. Ali, to the end of my days, I'll never understand how those bullets didn't hit you. The air must have been just full of them. We were screaming, 'Go, Ali, go, go!' You were still holding the rope. That was an amazing thing. We could see the tanker sitting patiently under the bridge, waiting to be blown up. Then you disappeared into the bushes. Tell the truth, you seemed to float into them like an angel. I had this bizarre idea that you'd been hit and you were dead and I was watching your spirit. I just laughed and didn't say a word. Then, Homer said, a second later along came this flame. I don't think the soldiers could work it out. They just stood there, pointing at it and calling to each other. They couldn't see the tanker because it was tucked very nicely in under the bridge. But then they all suddenly decided that they were in danger. They turned around and went belting off the bridge. They were just in time. You'll be glad to know, he said, looking at me, that I don't think any of them were hurt. I nodded a thank you to him. It meant a lot to me, but not everything. If I knowingly did things like blowing up bridges, then the fact that by sheer good luck no one was hurt didn't let me off the hook. Once I made my decision to go with the tanker, I've been ready to live with the consequences, whatever they were. There was a pause of another second, Homer went on, and then she blew. I'll tell you, I've never seen anything like it. The bridge lifted about 5 metres at the tanker end. It actually hung in the air for a few seconds before it fell back. But when it fell back, everything seemed just slightly out of alignment. Then suddenly there was a second explosion as bits flew everywhere. The massive fireball went straight up. Then there were 2 more explosions, and all we could see was fire. There were spot fires everywhere, as well as the main fire. The whole park seemed to be burning, let alone the bridge. Like Lee said, it was a real blast. Well, Wirraway's been wanting a new bridge for a long time, Lee said. Looks like they'll have to get one now. Homer's bedtime story had been exciting, and I'd enjoyed it, even though I was almost scared by the power of what we'd done and what we were able to do. The only thing Homer had left out was the way he'd wept when he found us both safe. I saw the sweetness of Homer then, that he'd, as a little guy, but which some people probably thought he'd lost as a teenager. We went off to some shady spots in among the rocks. Lee had first sentry duty. I wanted to sit up with him to keep him company, but suddenly a wave of fatigue hit me so powerfully that I really did buckle at the knees. I crawled into a cool gap between some boulders, and with a purloined pillow made myself comfortable. I went into a sleep so deep that it was more like unconsciousness. Lee told me later that he tried to get me to do a sentry turn, but he couldn't wake me, so he did my shift for me. I didn't wake till 4 o'clock. It was nearly dark before any of us showed much life or energy. The only thing that got us going was a desire to get home, to see the other 4 again. We decided it was safe to use the bikes. We worked out a route that would both take us back to my place, where we'd left the Land Rover, and a leapfrog pattern of travelling that should protect us from unwelcome patrols. It's funny when I look back on that trip. I wonder why I didn't feel any premonition. We were all too tired, I suppose. We felt that the worst was over and we'd done our job and now we deserved a rest. Sort of brought up to believe that that's the way life should be. So at about 10 o'clock we set off. We were careful. We travelled slowly. We were as quiet as possible. It was about midnight when we rode up my familiar driveway, bypassing the house and going straight to the garage. The Land Rover was hidden in the bush, but I wanted some more tools from the shed. I switched the bike off and put it on its stand, then turned the corner into the big machinery shed. What I saw there was like one of those Christmas tableaus at church, with Joseph and Mary and the shepherds and stuff standing in their positions, lifelike but frozen. The tableau in our shed was lit by a dim torch, its battery starting to weaken. Kevin was against an old wool press that was up against the wall. Crouched beside him was Robin, with one hand on his shoulder. Chris was standing on his other side, looking down at Corrie. Corrie was lying across Kevin's lap. Her eyes were closed, and her head was back, and there was no colour in her face. As I stood there, Kevin and Chris and Robin all turned their faces towards me, but Corrie still didn't open her eyes. I couldn't move. It was as though I too had joined the tableau. Then Kevin said, "She's been shot, Allie." His voice broke the spell. I ran forward and knelt beside Corrie. I heard the exclamations from Homer and the others as they came into the shed, but I had only eyes for Corrie. There was a little blood coming out of her mouth, tiny bright bubbles of pink blood. "Where was she hit?" I asked them. "In the back," Chris answered. It seemed almost unnaturally calm. Robin was sobbing soundlessly. Kevin was shaking. "What are we going to do?" Fee asked, coming forward. I glanced up at her. Her huge eyes seemed to fill her face with shock and horror. "We'll have to take her into town," Homer said. "We know the hospital's still functioning. We'll have to trust him to look after her. There's no other choice." He was right. There wasn't. "I'll get the Landy," I said, standing up. "No," Homer said swiftly. "The Merc's still here. It's closer, and it'll give her a better ride." I ran to get it. I backed it into the shed and jumped out to help lift Corrie in, but they didn't need me for that. They moved her carefully and slowly into the back seat. Then we stuffed the foot space with hessian sacks and jammed cushions all around her, so she couldn't roll or move. I choked on my sobs as I watched her lying there, her chest slowly rising and falling with each gurgling breath. This was my dear Corrie, my lifelong friend. If Homer was my brother, Corrie was my sister. Her face looked so calm, but I felt there was a terrible war being waged inside her body, a fight to the death. I straightened up and turned to the others. Homer was speaking. "This is going to sound cruel," he said, "but the only thing to do is to take her to the gate of the hospital, abandon the car with Corrie in it, ring the bell, and run like hell. We've got to try to think rationally about it. 7 people are better than 6. If we lose not just Corrie, but someone else too, well, it weakens us badly. Not to mention the unpleasant questions that person would have to face." Kevin stood. "No," he said, "no. I don't give a stuff what's rational and what's logical. Corrie's my mate, and I'm not going to dump her and run. It has to be me or Ali, because we're the only drivers. And Ali, if you don't mind, I want to do it." I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I couldn't. Kevin walked around to the driver's seat and got in. Fee leaned through the window and kissed him. He held her arm briefly, then let it go. "Good luck, Kevin," Lee said. "Yes," Homer echoed, as the car started to reverse. "Luck, Kevin." Chris patted the bonnet of the car. Robin was crying too much to speak. I ran around the front of the car and leaned in Kevin's window, walking with the car as it continued to back. "Kevin," I said, "give my love to Corrie." "Sure will," he answered. "And to you, Kevin." "Thanks, Ali." The car was out in the open and making its turn. He put it in its first and turned out the lights and drove away. I could see the concentration in his face as he avoided the bumps in the driveway. I knew Corrie was in good hands, and I understood the lights too. I stood watching until the red tail spots had disappeared in the distance. "Let's go home," Homer said. "To hell."
The group have blown up the bridge, Kevin has taken Corrie to hospital, and the others have returned to hell. This was the final chapter. Join me again in the next episode for the epilogue of Tomorrow When the War Began.